Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to open the side event on persecution of Christians and blasphemy laws in Pakistan and Nigeria. The Christians are the most persecuted for their religion in the world. In 30 years, the number of countries affected by the persecution of Christians has almost doubled. More than 360 million Christians are severely persecuted or discriminated against in the world because of their religion. Today, we are going to hear and to be a witness to the persecution suffered by Christians in two of the most war difficult countries, Nigeria and Pakistan. We will focus on one of the causes of this persecution, the anti-blasphemy laws, which are used not only to prohibit any critical discussion of Islam, including by people of Muslim origin, but also to frighten and condemn innocent people, as we will see in the case of the young Shahzad Masih, arrested at the age of 16 and sentenced to death for blasphemy. We particularly want to denounce these anti-blasphemy laws here at the Human Rights Council because they are the cause of extremely serious violations of the freedoms of expression and religion. It is therefore up to the Human Rights Council to take action to defend the freedoms of everyone, particularly in religious matters. We are very fortunate to have the participation of two Nigerian lawyers who are fully dedicated to the defense of Christians in their country, as well as of an American lawyer who works directly with Pakistan and a Pakistani lawyer who also works on those cases in Pakistan. We will also be hearing a testimony from Shahzad Masih's parents, as well as a message from the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief, Professor Ghanea. This event today is sponsored by the European Center for Law and Justice, the American Center for Law and Justice, and Jubilee Campaign. The European Center for Law and Justice is an advocacy NGO working primarily with European human rights institutions and the UN mechanism. The ECLJ has an affiliate organization in Pakistan, the Organization for Legal Aid, composed of courageous lawyers specialized in the defense of the Christian minority. The American Center for Law and Justice is a legal organization defending constitutional and human rights law worldwide, with an exceptional experience and expertise in the defense of freedom of religion. Jubilee Campaigns promotes the human rights and religious liberty and of ethnic and religious minorities, and protects and promotes the dignity and safety of women and children from bodily harm and sexual exploitation. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Mrs. CeCe Heil. CeCe Heil, you are a senior counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. You are specializing in public policy and global legal matters, including the UN. You had a team of lawyers handling cases in defense of life, protection of US national security interests, and dealing as well with Islamic extremism. You were the lead counsel who secured the release of Pastor Andrew Brunson from Turkey and Pastor Brian Neren from India. CeCe Heil, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gregor. We are all here today to address the issue of Christian persecution, especially with regard to blasphemy laws. And although these laws completely contradict the human rights that this body protects, there are still several member states that not only have these laws on their books, but allow them to be used to target and punish Christians. We will be focusing on Pakistan and the mob culture that uses these laws to literally destroy the lives of Christians. Since the enactment of blasphemy laws in Pakistan, there have been over 2,000 cases registered, over 70 people murdered, and hundreds imprisoned, many on death row or serving life sentences. One of those on death row is our client, Shahzad Masih. Shahzad grew up in a Christian home He's the oldest of 4 children, and when he was only 16, he was working as a janitor in a hospital and unfortunately became the target of a co-worker who was a much older and very savvy Muslim religious leader. He was falsely accused of blasphemy and has languished in prison for over 5 years and has recently been sentenced to death by hanging. I'm going to let his parents tell you his story, and then I will follow up with more specifics regarding his case, as well as some action items we would like for you all to consider. And so now we will hear from his parents.
He has been accused of blaspheming the Prophet of Islam, but he didn't do it. It started in 2017. He started working at a hospital as a janitor. So there were 2 other guys that worked in that room with him. One was involved with a religious sect, and the other one was working with them. Shahzad came home one day, and he said a few days ago, there was sort of a conversation between him and the Muslim guy Ishtiaq. So after 2 to 3 days, he came home and told me that Jalali says we don't look like Christians. Why don't you become Muslims? Your mom comes here and it seems like you guys know these people. You have a good relationship with all the Muslims. So why don't you actually become Muslim? Shahzad said, no, I don't want to become a Muslim. I'm good with my religion. I'm not going to leave Christianity. Ishtiaq told Shahzad that when he asked him why doesn't he become a Muslim, you gave me an answer in anger. Why were you angry about it? You know, these Muslim guys, they all have a good relationships. Why do you not become a Muslim? What's wrong with becoming a Muslim? Ishtiaq told him about Muslim prophets. Shahzad told him that there's a Muslim guy who knows my dad, and he comes and hangs out with my dad. And even he drinks alcohol, and he swears whenever he hears a name with Muhammad in it. And he's a Muslim. So Ishtiaq Jalali said, what kind of Muslim is he, who says these kind of things? Shahzad told him that it was his father's friend. And Ishtiaq just got furious. He swore at Shahzad, walked out of the room, and he slammed the door. After that, he didn't talk to Shahzad. Later, Ishtiaq came home to fetch Shahzad and told him that he was going to take him to the hospital because the doctor was back. Now there's a madrasa near the hospital. It's an Islamic religious school. Ishtiaq brought other Muslim men from the Muslim religious fanatic group with him. Across the street from the hospital, there's a mobile phone shop, and they took Shahzad there to record his words. And there were maybe 30 to 35 people who gathered all from that Muslim sect. A lot of people were there. After they took him to that store, they asked him, tell us what you said. Shahzad kept telling them that it's not me who said anything. It's my dad's friend who said bad words. I haven't said anything. From the phone store, they took him to the madrasa, the Islamic school. Shahzad's dad and his older brother went to the hospital, and some people told them don't even go near the madrasa. All these Islamic clerics are very, very angry. So my husband's brother went into the madrasa and tried to talk to them, but they wouldn't listen to him. The police were informed and came to the madrasa. The policeman said that he's going to take Shahzad with him. So he took Shahzad to the police station. We were really worried. The doctor who knew us told us not to stay in the area because these Muslims are going to get angry and they're going to make it a big deal. So don't stay here. Your lives are in danger. We met Shahzad in prison. He was very worried and he kept crying. We went to the superintendent of the police and he told us that he can't do anything. There's a visitation day and we go to the prison to see him. They used to bring him with other prisoners, but they said because all the other prisoners are Muslim, It wasn't safe for him to meet. He's a Christian. And if people know what he has done, it would not be good. So they would bring him in an empty place where I would meet him. I would only meet him for 20 minutes each time. What can we think about it? I mean, he was a little child when they arrested him and he's still too young. He's in prison for nothing from the beginning.
We go to the prison and we just survive by just seeing him. It's like a bird in a cage, and it's like my son is locked in a cage.
So we just plead with everybody who are watching, pray for us. Pray for our son that he gets justice.
So as you heard from Shahzad's parents, their son is completely innocent. He did not commit blasphemy. He was targeted by Ishtiaq Jalali, a member of the fanatical group TTIP. Yet Shahzad's childhood has been taken from him, as he has been in prison since he was only 16. What you didn't hear from his parents is the complete disregard for facts, law, or justice that occurred in the courtroom. Once Shahzad was handed over to the police, they started their investigation. The superintendent of police stated in his report that neither he nor the eyewitness found any blasphemy in Shahzad's conversation. His investigation also found that Shahzad was a minor, illiterate, and did not have clear knowledge of any religion, and only repeated words at the direction of Ishtiaq Jalali. Based on this investigation, that the police literally said he was not guilty, he had not committed any blasphemy, one would think that no prosecutor would pursue this case any further and no judge would entertain trying it. But that's not the way false blasphemy charges play out in Pakistan. Because Shahzad is a Christian, not only did the prosecutor pursue the case, the judge erroneously tried Shahzad as an adult, completely ignoring the police investigation findings and Shahzad's government-issued birth certificate, which is required by law to prevail. And why would a judge do this? Why would that be done? Because as a juvenile, Shahzad was entitled to be immediately released on bail. And the judge obviously was not going to follow the law and release Shahzad. A much bigger plan seemed to be in place with the mob controlling the outcome. It's common knowledge that in Pakistan, trial courts often convict those accused of blasphemy, even when there is no evidence supporting the convictions. This happens because Muslim fanatics pack courtrooms to intimidate the judges. This is exactly what happened in Shahzad's case. TTIP members regularly attended the hearings, and the leader had the audacity to post a video threatening that if Shahzad was not convicted, they would kill Shahzad with their own hands. And on November 22nd, 2022, before the judge announced the decision that Shahzad was guilty and was sentenced to death by hanging, TTIP leaders were present in the courthouse. They did a photo shoot and they left as if they already knew the judge's ruling. So no one who hears the facts of this case could possibly believe that the rule of law was followed or justice has been done. We have, of course, filed an appeal to the Lahore High Court, but it could take years before the appeal is heard. Surely Pakistan cannot think it's adhering to its commitments to this body and other international agreements by completely ignoring not only the human rights of Shahzad, but his rights under Pakistan's own laws. Pakistan must take immediate steps to right this wrong. This innocent, young 16-year-old boy who is now 22 has already lost his teenage years sitting in prison. He should not have to lose one more day wrongfully imprisoned while the courts deny him justice. And now I would like to turn it over to Shaheryar, who works directly with our office in Pakistan, to go over the action items that we would like for you to consider. And as time allows, he will answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, CeCe, for sharing the story and the facts of Shahzad's case. Before I just inform you about the action items, I would like to let you know that I met him twice most recently last November at the court at his hearing. And when I saw him, I met him 4 years ago, but when I saw him this time, he was simply just worried, and he had no health. Like, he was not in good health. He was a skeleton of bones because he was worrying what the court will do. And what he told me was that I don't care anymore now. Let them hang me. Let them just decide the case. I am tired of waiting. But what happened was the court that month sentenced him to death. Now he has to wait longer. And as CeCe mentioned about the court system, how much he might have to wait, our action item is really what we're asking is a request to the Human Rights Council and the permanent mission of Pakistan to basically urge the Pakistani authorities to expedite his hearing at the High Court so that the High Court could review. And we believe under these facts, the High Court will most likely see through what happened, the injustice happened in this case, and would most likely release. But even then, I think it's very important that the government communicates with the courts and the administration to really provide justice in this case and actually release him. We also have a letter that, a sample letter that you can pick up at the exit that you can use which includes the facts and the outcome of the case, and you can use to communicate with your representatives. Thank you. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
We are now moving to the situation in Nigeria. We have today with us two Nigerian lawyers who are dedicating their work and their activity in the defense of the Christians in Nigeria, who, Nigeria is one of the worst countries in the world in regard to persecutions of Christians. So I will first give the floor to Mrs. Fatima Njoku. Fatima, you are a Nigerian lawyer. You are Director of Advocacy with the Stefanos Foundation. It is a human rights advocacy, relief, and psychosocial therapy organization. In other terms, it's an organization that supports the Christians who had to go through persecution. You are a voice for them and you defend them. So I'm very pleased to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you all. I'm going to start by giving a little summary about Nigeria, just to give a context and a background. So Nigeria is a country that is multi-religious and multi-ethnic, very important to note. And also it operates a democracy, a democratic system of government, not a theocratic system of government. The Constitution entrenches presidential system of government, separation of powers, rule of law, supremacy of the Constitution, and it operates a mixed legal system comprising of the English common law, customary law, and Sharia law. Now, the Nigerian Constitution is supreme. All persons, all authorities in the country are under the Constitution. It has a binding force on all persons and authorities. No person or group of persons can take any portion of the country and take control of it. And most importantly, any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution will, to the extent of that inconsistency, be null and void. Now, blasphemy laws in Nigeria, my senior colleague here is going to delve in-depthly on it, so I will not go too deeply into that. But just to say that since the year 2000, 12 northern states in the country have codified and adopted the criminal aspects of Sharia law and as the applicable penal codes in those states. And then that's where the penal aspects of Sharia law, because they have brought in the criminal aspects of Sharia law into those penal codes and now are applying them. And that's where you now see the penal aspects of blasphemy laws going to, the capital punishment like death penalty. Now, the blasphemy has moved from being a misdemeanor, something that could have been just punished with a few years imprisonment, to death penalty, and of the most gruesome, gruesome type, most times when it's done extrajudicially. Sharia courts ordinarily only have jurisdiction over Muslims or non-Muslims who consent to its jurisdiction. But in practice, because of the complications that have been brought into these things, it's not really the case anymore. Now, we have what we call legal pluralism in Nigeria. Most of the time, even though the Constitution is supreme, a substantial population they don't really look to the Constitution to guide them. In fact, a substantial population in the North do not even know the provisions of the Constitution, nor do they really care about it. Most of the time, we have heard when even officials, legal officials, members of the executive arm of government, using Sharia as the basis for their decisions rather than the Constitution. They don't cite the Constitution sometimes. Rather, they cite the Constitution, Sharia provisions as the basis for most of the decisions that they give. Now, Section 10 of our Constitution says that the government of the Federation or the state shall not adopt any religion as state religion. I repeat, the government of the Federation or of a state shall not adopt any religion. And this is not supposed to mean that Nigeria is a secular country. It's multi-religious, because even from the preamble of the Constitution, it acknowledges that we're, under God and all of that. So we have also Section 38 of the Constitution that talks about freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So it gives to every Nigerian the freedom to choose their religions, the freedom to adopt it, and the freedom to even change if they want. Then Section 39 says that every person shall be entitled to freedom of expression, including freedom to hold opinions or receive and impart ideas and information without interference. So not just is it that we cannot adopt any religion as state religion, we have freedom of religion or belief constitutionally. We also have freedom of expression. And Section 36, looking at sub 1 and sub 4, says in the determination of your civil rights and obligations, a person shall be entitled to fair hearing within a reasonable time by a court or tribunal established by law and constituted in such a manner as to secure its independence and impartiality. It's very important that we know these things. So you find that Nigeria is not really suffering from absence of laws or effective laws, but the implementation is usually the problem. Now, it necessarily follows, therefore, that persons who are free to express their opinions and where anyone is aggrieved by any such expression, such matter should be reported to the police for prosecution. Or they can actually, approach the court themselves and institute an action. But what we find is that there's a rise in mob violence in Nigeria. In practice, the rate of mob violence on allegations of blasphemy is fast rising. Simply on mere allegations, without proof, a mob becomes the accuser, they become the judge, or, we don't operate jury system, but if you know what I mean by being the judge and jury, and they become executioners instantly. And so all that is needed is for someone to accuse another person falsely for blasphemy, whether rightly or wrongly, whether for motives that are outside of what you can even justify. People just come from nowhere and then they execute judgment. This is not right, as you'll agree with me. Now, I will take just 2 examples because, like I said earlier, my senior colleague here is going to do justice to that aspect. Just last month, Usman Buddha was beaten to death in Sokoto State. He was just having a conversation or an argument with his colleagues. And he said something that someone felt offended by and thought it was blasphemy. And then they decided to beat him to death. It was so bad that the police reported that as soon as they got there, the mob disappeared, but he died as soon as he got to the hospital. And from the testimony of people who know him, they report that Usman Buddha was a devout Muslim. He was not a Christian. Last year, we have the issue of the Deborah Samuel, like many people will know. She was a student in the Shehu Shagari College, still in Sokoto State. She was gruesomely murdered on allegations of blasphemy because she sent a voice note to her class WhatsApp talking about clarifying issues of the purpose for the class WhatsApp, which she said, it was reported that she said the WhatsApp group was for academic purposes and not religious purposes. Whatever else was the content of that voice note, all we can say or all we know is that a mob decided that she had blasphemed and they killed her in the most gruesome way possible. Stoning her, we were not there, but we heard the reports. The people who did that, who stoned her, who killed her, and made sure they burnt her, filmed themselves. That's to tell you the extent of impunity. Not only did they film themselves, they admitted that this is what they have done. In a in a school environment where there are authorities, where there should be security. Now, in the case of Usman Buddha, the police spokesman said the mob escaped the scene and left the victim unconscious. Really? You mean that the mob, all the mob, everybody escaped by the time the police got there? And they were so effective that they could not catch one person. Now, in the case of Deborah Samuel, it was a large mob. There were students, there were lecturers, there were people there. There are classmates. But only 2 suspects were arrested and charged for inciting public disturbance. Now, how fair is that? And like that is not bad enough. The suspects, as far as we know now, have been discharged for lack of diligent prosecution because the police simply did not turn up when these cases were in court. Now, there are other examples, so many examples that he's going to be talking about, but I'll just make a note that the Center for Democracy and Development estimates that 13,241 Nigerians were killed extrajudicially between 2011 and 2021, noting that these unlawful killings go largely unpunished. And like I have just, said now, from the response of the police and the prosecution, the kind of prosecutions that come up for these kind of things, you see that, of course, many times people are able to get away with mob actions. Now, government response has continued to be merely rhetorical. Investigations will be carried out and perpetrators brought to book. That's what they will say. Most of the time, you hear government officials come out to condemn. It's so rhetorical that you can almost predict that that's what they will say. Oh, this has happened, investigations will be carried out, perpetrators will be brought to book. To the point that it's now a thing of mockery, and people say this book will soon be, when will this book be full? Now, when these investigations are carried out, it could take eternity, and in most cases, like the woman in 2016, there's a woman, Bridget Agbaheme, who was reported to have been beheaded in 2016 in Kano State on allegations of blasphemy. And of course, like I said, mob action again. The Attorney General of that state and Minister of Justice told the court that the suspects had no case to answer, and so the suspects were let off the hook. Now, rising religious extremism in Nigeria is becoming a concern, and we see that blasphemy or false allegations of blasphemy seem to enable this to continue to happen. And then because this continues because our leaders who swore with their holy books to uphold the Constitution, when they get there, rather than uphold Constitution and constitutional provisions, they advance religious and primordial interests, sowing seeds of discord in their utterances, actions, and inactions. Should the international community care? Well, is FOB important for a peaceful world? An implosion of Nigeria will be disastrous, trust me. Not just for Nigeria, not just for Africa, but for the world. We need that the blasphemy laws that are happening, not just in Nigeria, even in Pakistan, should be looked at again. We advocate for a repeal of all blasphemy laws as it's becoming a driver for religious extremism, and it's inconsistent with international human rights laws, which are ratified by Nigeria. Until full investigations and diligent prosecutions are made to send clear message that mob violence and extrajudicial killings are unacceptable. It will continue to be the trend, and nobody should think it's safe. Muslims and Christians alike, nobody should think that he's safe. Now, a United Nations resolution on blasphemy laws need to be done, and urgently as well. We advocate that the United Nations should have a resolution on blasphemy because it affects people's right to life, especially right to freedom of expression. It affects even right to freedom of assembly. Human rights is interconnected. You cannot take one and leave one. And so we want that the resolution on blasphemy should be looked at. We also advocate that a fact-finding and a documentation and analysis of the continuous attacks of religiously motivated attacks in Nigeria be done. Even government officials who are aiding and abetting these things should be held accountable. Communications from the different UN mechanisms have not been responded to, and they should be made, public so that other things can be properly followed up. We also want that the passivity of the federal government, which encourages impunity in Nigeria, should not be allowed to go on by making them accountable. I think I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Njoku, for your presentation. We are now continuing with Mr. Kola ALAPINNI. Kola ALAPINNI, you are also a Nigerian human rights lawyer. You have an extensive experience in defending religious freedom before courts. You have important cases on those matters of blasphemy in Nigerian courts. You believe religious freedom is key for a more stable, harmonious and prosperous society. So I'm very pleased to give you now the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I represent Foundation for Religious Freedom. We represent both. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, first and foremost, I represent Foundation for Religious Freedom. I am General Counsel and Director of Operations. We represent both believers, non-believers, and those in between. So we basically defend the Constitution. Two of our very important clients, people who we've represented, are Muslims. That's Omar Farouk Bashir and Yahya Aminu Sharif. Omar Farouk was a minor when he was arrested, and he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for blasphemy. He was unrepresented. He had no legal counsel. The Sharia courts were in a hurry to convict. Essentially, they just wanted to get the matter off their hands. Also, Yahya Aminu Sharif was convicted the same day in the same court by the same judge. He wasn't so lucky. He got the death penalty. Both of them were convicted under Section 382. That's the Sharia. That's the handbook of the Sharia courts, like a compendium. And that's the section which you will be charged with in northern Nigeria, especially in Kano State. Section 382B of the Penal Code Law, Sharia, Kano State Sharia Penal Code Law. And it says, whoever by any means publicly insult by using word or expression in written or verbal, by means of gesture, which shows or demonstrates any form of contempt or abuse against the Holy Quran or any prophet, shall on conviction be liable to death. And that's it. Once they charge you under this section, God be with you. If it could take months or years to get you off the hook. And that's the provision which Omar Farouk and Yahya Aminu Sharif were charged with. Fortunately, we were able to quash the conviction of the minor completely. He has no place being in an adult court. So he got off the hook completely. If you can show us the picture of Omar Farouk, that's him on the day we got him released from prison. I'll tell you an interesting story, because when we filed the case, he didn't have any legal representation. He didn't know who we were. We just went in discreetly and filed. So when we got him out of prison, when he saw us, he ran away because he thought we had come to kill him. Because that's what they had been told in court, that, hey, you know, this is what happens when the state comes for you, because he didn't know we're his lawyers. And that was the first picture that went viral, picked up by CNN and everybody. I took that picture from the back of the getaway vehicle where we're just leaving the prison yard, we're going to the safe house. And that's the picture of the family when we resettled them. That's the sister, all covered, as you can see, she's covered, they're Muslims. And that's the brother-in-law, limited English, they're saying thank you. Those are his niece and nephew, and that's Omar Farouk himself in the blue t-shirt. That's the legal team, the first appeal. And so we go to Yahya Aminu Sharif. That was the first visit to Yahya Aminu Sharif in prison. He's a musician who sang praises of his cleric, his Islamic cleric. And that was found to be blasphemy because they said those things he sang about elevated his cleric above Prophet Muhammad. And he's saying Prophet Muhammad is a human being. My cleric is a human being. Both of them are not God, but I love my prophet more. And that's what got him into trouble. They stormed their house, destroyed it. The family went out the skelter. He was arrested. Eventually, the matter went to court. As I said, he was sentenced to death. We challenged this, and the death sentence was quashed. But they returned him to the Sharia court for a retrial. And if he goes back to the Sharia court for a retrial, he will still have to take his pleas, guilty or not guilty. And he will be charged under the same section 382B. That was when I went to see him in prison the second time. And he had just signed new. This was the second time where eventually we were able to get him to sign representation and all that. So if he goes again to take the plea, he will still be facing the death penalty. So what we've come up with is, hey, there's freedom of expression. For the first time, I must add, when we went on appeal the second time, because as I said, the first appeal, he was sent back to go and be retried. And we challenged it because we don't recognize the Sharia law, at least the punitive parts of the Sharia law. Sharia law has always existed in Nigeria. Pre the colonial times, pre-British rule, it's always existed. Then the British came and we did away with the criminal aspects of it. And what are the criminal aspects? If we go to the codification of the book, you would see the lashing of people, chopping off of limbs, stoning people to death. All these were done away. So if you can see over here, right there, subsection 2, up there, it says where the offender is convicted for the second theft. So if you steal for the first time, you chop off your right hand. This is the law in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria. They chop off your right hand. This is not Saudi Arabia. This is not Iran. They chop off your right hand, then they chop off your left leg, and this. If you're a woman who's been accused of adultery, you could be stoned to death. And we are now saying Nigeria is a signatory to international instruments, okay? We willingly went into these agreements ourselves. And even our constitution, section 34 of the constitution, guarantees the right to dignity. Therefore, you cannot be stoning people to death, you cannot chop off people's limbs, etc., etc. And that's our argument now before the Supreme Court. For the first time ever, we were able to win the recognition of Section 10, because the first appeal, the judge said, oh, Section 10 is not justiciable. That Section 10 says no state government or federal government can adopt any religion. And we were saying that the Sharia court, the promulgation of Sharia law in northern Nigeria is an endorsement of religion by the state. And the judge said, no, Section 10 is not justiciable, because you have various chapters under the Constitution. You have Chapter 1, which is very important. It's called Powers of the Government, Powers of the Federal Republic. Then you have Section 2, which is non-justiciable. These are just ideals, the ideals which we aspire to be. And then you have Chapter 3, you have Chapter 4, which is fundamental human rights, very, very important. And we said, no, you got it wrong. We went on appeal, and for the first time in history, the second highest court in Nigeria recognized Section 10. It was recognized by virtue of the case Yahya Sharif Aminu versus AG Kano State and Governor of Kano State. And the appeal court said, hey, you're wrong. Section 10 is very, very important. But the judges at the second highest court in Nigeria could not agree amongst themselves if Nigeria is a secular state or not. So in the judgments, there were various disagreements between the three judges as to the status of Nigeria and, you know, are we secular or not? Are we a religious state or not? What are we? You know. So at this stage, we have now challenged this second ruling. We are not going to the Sharia court. We are going to the Supreme Court instead. We don't recognize the criminal aspects of the Sharia law. We're asking the Supreme Court to tell us, give us a few answers. What is the status of Nigeria? Are we a religious country? Are we non-religious? Are we secular? More importantly, this Sharia law, as we have right now in Nigeria, the Constitution allows for Islamic personal law. Therefore, the Constitution allows for the creation of these Sharia courts to adjudicate or decide only on Islamic personal law. Marriage, if you're a Muslim, how is a marriage conducted? How many wives can you have? If you die, how do you want your property to be shared? Succession, that is the Sharia law that we recognize in Nigeria. Also, but the Constitution also gives the various states the authority to promulgate their own laws. But whatever law those states are promulgating must be in consonance with the Constitution. So Nigeria as a state party now has, you know, deposited to these international instruments. Whatever these individual states want to do must be in conformity with what Nigeria as a nation has signed up to. So that's why we are at the Supreme Court now. Time will not permit me too much to delve too much, but if you allow me, I'll talk about Deborah Samuel Yakubu, who was murdered in Sokoto, as my colleague has said. She was murdered by her classmates, by her friends, by people who she went to the same school together. Why was she murdered? There was a WhatsApp group made for coursework, and some people were sharing Islamic verses there, and she challenged them, and that's why she was killed. When the cases which we took up in northern Nigeria to defend, no northern lawyer, nobody in the north could come up, because there was a fatwa that says if you turn up and do this, you are not a Muslim and we will deal with you. And that's the reason why we were able to come from another part of the country to represent them. Guess what happened when Deborah Samuel Yakubu was killed and the police were able to apprehend two people? First, they were not charged with murder. They were charged with an offense of public disturbance, which is just a mere misdemeanor. 34 lawyers led by a professor of law came to court to defend them. Can you see the disparity? Eventually, the police did a shoddy job and those guys were let off the hook. We've seen a rise in religious killings in Nigeria. In my own opinion, I think the reason why we have seen a rise, first, is attributed to the delisting of Nigeria from a country of particular concern by the State Department. It's like a pat on the back. Once they did that, these killings have spiked and they will continue to rise with brazen impunity. We saw that happen in Sokoto State again with the Buddha murder, the butcher. We saw it happen in Abuja. Abuja might be the federal capital and we think it's so safe. It's not. If you say the wrong thing and you fall into the hands of these radical elements, you're gone in minutes. Because it's jungle justice. They're going to throw stones and sticks at you and just hack you to death and set your body on fire. We had videos which would have shown the three killings of Deborah Samuel Yakubu and the Buddha murder and one other person, but we can't show them because I understand that gory pictures are not allowed. We're going to show it with discretion, viewer discretion. So we can't do that anymore. So I've mentioned Deborah Samuel Yakubu. Briefly, I've mentioned Usman Buddha, the latest killing we had in Abuja. And then you have Bala Mubarak. One or two friends are on the legal defense team, but we don't represent them directly. Bala got tired of being in prison and he pled guilty on the morning where he was finally arraigned after being in custody for almost 3 years without his case going anywhere. His wife just gave birth, he has not seen his baby, and he just got tired and said, what's the worst case that can happen? I've already stayed 3 years in prison. If I plead guilty, maybe they're going to let me off quickly. He was in for a shocker. They sentenced him to 24 years imprisonment. So his legal team have now challenged this and have appealed it. And then we have, lastly, we're not the least, Rhoda Jatau. She was a mother of 5 in, I think, Bauchi State. She tried to publicize the murder of Deborah Samuel Yakubu on WhatsApp and spread, oh, this girl was killed in Sokoto State for this. And she was arrested for that. And she's been kept in incarceration, going to almost 2 years now. So I'm going to stop there for an opportunity for people to respond. So as I said earlier, the United States State Department removing Nigeria as a country of particular concern has contributed to the spike. If Nigeria is returned back to that list, it would show that we mean business. Secondly, I think we could, use travel bans as a deterrent to these government officials, especially the governors of these northern states who are, promulgating this Sharia law. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much for your remarks. It's very interesting. I saw your last recommendations. One concerns the policy of the United States that took out Nigeria from the list of countries of concern in matters of religious freedom. And the other one regards the travel bans. Would you tell us a bit more, before I give the floor, about the numbers of persons who are killed in Nigeria because of their religion? Do you know about the statistics every year?
Well, depending on who you ask, but is it on? Yeah, depending on who you ask, but I think we probably have an average of 1% or 2% per day being killed now in Nigeria, if not more. It's gone up. We have the highest number of killings, especially in the last regime, the last administration, the Buhari regime. He just didn't do anything. He seems to have, sympathy towards these people because there's an unwillingness of government to prosecute. Whether it comes from the herdsman or the bandits or, it's not just religion. It just was a lame duck precedent.
Okay. Maybe I will ask the same question to Mr. Gill. Do you know about the statistics in Pakistan regarding persons prosecuted for blasphemy and their origin of the persons as well?
Yes, so I think it's the same thing. It depends on who you ask, but most organizations that have collected the data, the number is about a little over 2,000 since 1986, in which blasphemy cases have been registered in the last 35 years. Over about 70 people have been killed extrajudicially. There are a number of people, hundreds in prisons. Some of them are on death row, and some of them are serving life sentences.
And what about their religious origin, their religious background?
Their religious background is basically blasphemy laws in Pakistan apply to everybody. So if you were to talk about proportionally, minorities are mostly targeted for under these laws, but the laws apply to Muslims as well. So there are many Muslims who are falsely charged with blasphemy laws.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we move for the final to the message from Mrs. Nazila GHANEA. She is the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief and a professor in Oxford. She also served at the OSCE panel on experts, where we served together on freedom of religion.
Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful for this invitation to address this side event which concerns an issue of core importance to the mandate and, of course, to freedom of religion or belief more generally. I apologize that I can't be with you in person. I'm in the adjacent room, but I'm delighted that I can share my thoughts with you via this recording. Let me begin by giving a brief introduction to this mandate as Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, before delving into more detail on the topic of the day and joining your call for decisive action to end persecution in Pakistan, Nigeria, and beyond. Approximately a year ago, I assumed this role as UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. As you know, this is one of about 45 thematic and 14 country-related mandates held by independent experts, sometimes referred to as the eyes and ears of the UN human rights system. If we fulfill that hope of being the eyes and ears, It is, of course, due to your support that we're able to carry out this role. The responsibility is to carry out thematic research to deepen knowledge and identify best practices to help states meet their international obligations with respect to various human rights issues, and in this case, that of freedom of religion or belief. The tools at the disposal of the mandate include twice-yearly thematic reports, one to the UN General Assembly and another to the United Nations Human Rights Council, along with the ability to communicate directly with states on alleged violations of freedom of religion or belief, all matters of concern relating to legislative proposals. Furthermore, upon invitation, the mandate undertakes missions to countries wherein I can engage with actors from state and civil society, identify best practices and areas for improvement with respect to freedom of religion or belief. This resulting in a public report clarifying these and offering technical support and follow-up. While the mandate has undergone small changes over time, this has existed since 1986, and over the past 37 years, the question of blasphemy and apostasy laws have consistently been among the most worrying issues, representing an affront to the very core of freedom of religion or belief, and raised regularly by each and every one of the mandate holders in all forms available to them and to us. Today's side event draws attention to the situation in two countries, which regrettably have serious obstacles to overcome in order to make freedom of religion or belief a lived reality for those in its jurisdiction. Foremost among these obstacles is the continued criminalization of offense to religious belief. In recent years, the mandate has communicated its concerns in this regard directly with the government of Pakistan on several occasions. These include the death sentence imposed on Mr. Junaid Hafiz, whose lawyer has also allegedly been extrajudicially killed for defending him as a supposed blasphemer. That is in PAK 7 2019 and PAK 3 2022. The situation in Pakistan has taken a notable turn for the worse this year, as many of you will be aware, notwithstanding the concerns which have been raised about the misuse of anti-blasphemy provisions in Pakistan's criminal law for decades. The National Assembly earlier this year approved an amendment to the penal code which aims to further increase the punishments related to certain expressions considered to be blasphemous. In April 2023, along with the Special Rapporteurs on extrajudicial executions, freedom of expression, and minority issues, I communicated my concerns to the government of Pakistan in relation to this development, along with the disturbing related trend of vigilante attacks against individuals accused of blasphemy and the places of worship and homes of religious minorities, including Ahmadis, Christians, and Hindus, and that's reflected in PAK 3 2023. The continued shrinking of legal space for civil discourse in relation to religious matters only serves to embolden those who wish to take the law into their own hands, often having deadly consequences for those who are accused, as well as undermining the rule of law itself. These developments take place against the backdrop of ever more aggravated intolerance towards religious or belief minorities in Pakistan. Prior communications to the government of Pakistan over recent months have drawn attention to related issues, including the increase in hate speech and incitement to violence against Ahmadis, PAK 2 2023, reprisals against human rights defenders for raising issues related to freedom of religion or belief in Pakistan's UPR process, PAK 1 2023, and the alleged ongoing practice of forced conversions and marriages of women and girls, particularly Christians and Hindus, PAK 6 2022. Regrettably, none of these communications have received a response to date. Now moving to Nigeria, the situation is similarly concerning of the ways in which blasphemy laws contribute to a context which both the state and non-state actors can target religious or belief minorities. Disappointingly, Nigeria also maintains an anti-blasphemy provision in its federal law, and like some other states, grants entities within its federal structures the autonomy to establish religious laws, which are in turn much harsher on alleged blasphemers. The mandate's most recent communications to the government of Nigeria, indeed, concern the blasphemy allegations against Mr. Mubarak Balla, president of the Nigerian Humanist Association, NGA 2 2021, and the Sufi artist, Mr. Yahya Sharif Aminu, NGA 4 2020. However, I am aware of credible reports in recent months of the persecution, including alleged killings, of Christians and other religious or belief minorities by armed groups, including Boko Haram and Fulani militants. These reports are an alarming indication of an inability or unwillingness to offer sufficient protection to religious or belief minorities, far from representing a mechanism to avoid conflict or embrace multiculturalism throughout the country. Nigeria's tolerance of harsh blasphemy provisions among its federal states, as well as its own criminalization of blasphemy, only encourages and legitimates mob violence in the eyes of its authors and supporters. This apparent failure of the domestic authorities to offer effective protection to those under their jurisdiction is reflected in the increasing concern with which international human rights and criminal justice authorities are viewing the situation. In this context, my mandate is currently requesting a country visit to Nigeria, which we certainly hope will be confirmed in the coming weeks. In conclusion, both Nigeria and Pakistan are states parties to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, and as my next report to the UN General Assembly will outline in more detail, mere ratification of international instruments, hopeful though it may be, is far from sufficient in making human rights, including freedom of religion or belief, a tangible and lived reality. To begin with, the domestic legal order must reflect these international standards, and anti-blasphemy laws are squarely inconsistent with them. Then comes the even harder work of addressing violence, hatred, and discrimination motivated by religion or belief among officials, law enforcement, the judiciary, municipal functionaries, and society as a whole. These challenges are by no means unique to Nigeria or Pakistan. Indeed, they exist everywhere to a lesser or greater extent, and we all have work to do in addressing them. Incitement to violence and hate speech against others based on religion or belief must, in this regard, also be addressed. However, vague anti-blasphemy laws are not the answer. Rather, as my predecessors have repeatedly underlined, they are counterproductive and themselves encourage the kind of violence and discrimination we are currently focusing on. Legitimate discourse concerning religion or belief must be distinguished from incitement, and there is very helpful guidance available to states and all of us in making this distinction, including through the Rabat Plan of Action. In this connection, I wish to again call on governments, and those of both Nigeria and Pakistan in particular, to bring their domestic legal order in line with international standards on freedom of religion or belief, as well as freedom of expression, to repeal their anti-blasphemy laws and cease all prosecutions based thereon. Moreover, they must respect their due diligence obligations to protect persecuted religious or belief minorities, and in line with the Rabat Plan of Action, take effective action against hate speech and incitement to violence against them. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I thank you very much for your attention. It's time now to close. In the name of the European Center for Law and Justice, the American Center for Law and Justice, and Jubilee Campaign, I thank you very much for your attention and future actions. I recall that we request those countries, in particular Pakistan and Nigeria, to end the abuse of blasphemy laws. And we also request the Human Rights Council to act in this regard, in particular to initiate a mission to Nigeria to investigate violence against Christians in particular. Thank you very much for your attention. You can, of course, continue the discussion outside, and the presentation has been recorded. It will be online on the website of the organization. We are at your disposal, and we hope this event will contribute to end those anti-blasphemy laws. Thank you very much.
Grégor.